Hi, my name is Terry J. Amon, and welcome to this, my 22nd episode of Video Fuzzy. In this installment, I throw open a stained glass window on my theological underpinnings through an MSNBC production on the Gospel of Judas. I craft a homemade DVD of Tin Man and make a batch of Germans from Russia Styrum off of Prairie Mosaic. And in what I've been watching, I rip on Waco and Living Biblically. Welcome to the show!
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.
I've got to take care of this first.
Well, that was lovely.
That isn't quite how I...
I'd like to speak to your manager.
Feedback.
I actually have feedback. I just found it. I was scrolling through my show page at videofuzzy.libsyn.com and had a comment posted on episode 17 enjoying a few finales from Dale Stringer, the stage manager I worked with in The Importance of Being Earnest in 2001. He wrote, "Thank you for the praise." Oh, hey, you're welcome. I remember the scene changes in Earnest a little differently. Thought it was more of a chaotic sprint combined with a scavenger hunt. That was some set, though. I'm glad we were able to pull it off. Any idea on how long the stage lasted? Like I told him, I just saw this. I changed my settings so I should get notified from here on out, and I apologized for taking so long to respond. I said chaotic sprint combined with scavenger hunt sounded like a good description. As for the stage he built, I know we were still using it during my last production with the Minot Area Theatrical Society in 2011, so at least 10 years, and I believe they're still using it actually. Thanks for the comment. I got a second comment, this one from Tom Rafferty on episode 21, negotiating an episode pileup. He wrote, "I know it would be a lot more work, but it would be cool to see a video of you doing your podcast." Thank you, Tom. Tom is a former colleague of mine from when I worked at the Minot Daily News. I replied I'd have so many editing issues with that. It's hard enough to clean up audio sufficiently in post, let alone the wacky jump cut stylings of adding visuals. Plus, the temptation to add screenshots from the shows I'm talking about would be overwhelming, and I could conceivably run into some fair use issues that I had become aware of when somebody sued me. In reality, it could be fun to do a video post at some point. I recently noticed that with the ever-expanding length of these things, I needed to either downgrade my audio quality or upgrade my hosting bandwidth. I erred on the side of improved audio quality, so I certainly have the space to post video. So maybe for anniversary episodes I could try something like that. I've got one coming up here in a couple of months. We'll see how it goes. In the meantime, I'll post a photo of me at the mic recording this episode on my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook, so mostly I look like that. Enjoy! Finally, speaking of audio quality, I got some feedback as part of taking part in Fei Wu's response roundup a month or so ago. A co-respondent to that inquiry, Chris Cooling from the Forgotten TV podcast, offered a helpful solution to reduce the high-pitched whine he was hearing behind the audio in my episodes. I wasn't 100% clear on the solution. I've hung a blanket behind where I'm recording, and I put the clock under a pillow to reduce noise in the room, but I'm only potting my mic for the first time in this episode. Hopefully that solves the problem, though honestly, and I'm listening to this thing on earbuds, and I wasn't really hearing it one way or t'other. I know episode 6 was an audio nightmare, but the ones I've recorded since then, well, if anyone's having any playback or audio issues, I absolutely want to know about them. And thank you for the feedback, Chris. As I say at the end, feedback is always appreciated.
Friday Night Feature.
For this installment, my Friday night feature traffics in verifying antiquities from ancient scriptures, texts, and apocrypha, distant lands, and times in which I actually gave a rip about this stuff. Our touchpoint is The Gospel of Judas, a docudramatic feature cobbled together and aired on MSNBC in 2006. Unsourced, non-attributed narration ties together interviews and dramatic recreations of ancient texts ascribed to Judas Iscariot. Specifically, and this is part of my dubious take on this presentation, the paucity of actual material upon which they base this hour-long special, a special which cuts out in my collection after only 40 minutes or so, but that fits this topic anyway. They spent so much time talking about the search for these documents, tracking the search back to regions similar to the regions this codex might have been found, to caves which were almost certainly similar to the caves in which this codex might have been found. No one admitting to having found it, but that just reaffirms the authenticity because they'd have been in violation of Egyptian antiquities law, while actors representing the contact peeking around corners and slamming the door on the camera crew chasing him, recreating what the scene was almost certainly like when these documents surfaced in the 1980s. I can't even with this. Along with this Dan Brown-esque folderol, and for the record, I've never watched a full minute of any part of the Da Vinci Code or National Treasure for that matter, but from previews this seems like a safe allegory to make. Producers have presented a Jesus talking to a Judas, recreating a scrap of dialogue from this ancient gospel wherein a soul Christ trapped, as various Gnostic followings asserted, trapped in a body Christ, could attain his glory only through conspiring with Judas to betray him and free him from his earthly vessel. From this scrap of heresy, the focus of the production shifts to a thumbnail sketch of Gnostics who felt the snake in Eden got a bad rap, how godly it is to achieve a knowledge of good and evil, that we can access the divine directly rather than through earthly intermediaries like priests and bishops, which producers asserted was part of a 2nd century Bishop Irenaeus, rejecting in no uncertain terms the claims of this gospel, thereby confirming its existence before it was forcibly suppressed and driven underground like dozens of other alternative gospels collected and preserved to the extent that they were able to as part of the Nag Hammadi scrolls, including such writings as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Producers pointed out that the 4 Gospels accepted, as gospel by the Council of Nicaea, convened by Roman Emperor Constantine in 325 AD, at which point there was an affirmed, approved Bible and rejected apocryphal texts, were all written decades after the events they describe and more attributed to apostles than written by them. The most contemporary, they said, was attributed to Mark and dated to about 70 AD, with the Gospel of John presumed the latest, dated to about 100 AD, so some 70 years after the crucifixion. That doesn't make any one gospel a better or more accurate account than another. Along with 1-star reviews by some 2nd century bishop, books were accepted as canon by being more or less in tune with what was solidifying as church teaching, and they were rejected on the basis of simply repeating the stories of more established, more complete gospels, and some on the basis of being actually heretical. This didn't make them not exist, and it didn't make any one more or less true than any other. They had their writers and they had their adherents, and the church had its detractors and its heretics. Writing all of this stuff down has been such a trip down memory lane for me. There was a time when I was teaching adult Sunday school in Devil's Lake. I researched, wrote, and led a multi-part discussion of church history centered in examination of world faiths around Bill Moyer's conversation with Methodist theologian Houston Smith. For a good long time before I lapsed, I was joyously involved in theological study and discourse, and even before I parted ways, I split my jaded approach to belief, rationalizing that while some parts of Christianity made no sense at all, other parts were at least good advice, good food for thought, and worthy of discussion. And I don't dispute that now. It's just not a way I intend to spend any more of my time or energy. With the recent death of Billy Graham, I reflect that for a good chunk of my formative years, I felt exterior to God's love, and during a televised event at my grandparents' home, I called in and got saved over the phone by a Billy Graham crusader. I've got to say, it is a transformational feeling, suddenly to feel a part of a story where you know you're justified through faith, that you feel that you are loved and valued if you before had not. And I imagine I was the kind of insufferable people avoid given the choice. I mean, I know I was judgy with an unexamined judginess that carried well into my college career, and yep, saved or not, I absolutely had some learning to do. At a point during confirmation while in high school, I really gelled with Luther's notion. I was baptized and confirmed Lutheran, calling for the church to be separate from government and political meddling. At the same time as my home faith, at the time, the American Lutheran Church, was merging with the Lutheran Church of America to become the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, where the main difference I could point to post-merger was pastors preaching political messages from the pulpit, which in 1988 was really standing out to me somehow. After a bit, I just was not feeling it anymore, and I stepped away from the church for a time while in college. When I moved to Botno, I explored a couple of options, not feeling any more at home in the Lutheran church there than I had anywhere else. I reached out to the Methodist Presbyterians, where I found a theology and social outreach that made a lot more sense to me. Methodism seemed to embrace discussion and more acceptance of people where they were at, whereas Lutheranism seemed to be more interested in directing parishioners what to believe and, more troubling, how to vote. As I grew in my involvement, I represented my church at annual conference for several years, during which time the discussion about acceptance of gays by the church drew further and further to the forefront, and while the church itself never got terribly explicit about accepting gays while I was attending, homosexuals were affirmed as persons with sacred worth, although the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with church teaching. It's just so important to some people to assert that God has favorites. Since that time, more reconciling ministries have arisen, and Methodists are certainly farther along the tolerance continuum than other Protestant followings. Of course, any given following is made up of people with the broadest range of tolerance and acceptance for change, for sinners, and in which case whose sins are more socially acceptable than others. But the main takeaway from this discussion should be that for a good long while, religion was a topic I allowed more real estate in my brain, and for longer a time than maybe I should. Even for the last decade or so of my church involvement, I took the position that, yes, these are interpretations of ancient texts written by people seeking in some ways explicitly to control the lives of others, but there's a lot of good ideas in there too. I was taking a really academic approach to religion, one that seemed to be totally at home in John Wesley's instructional approach to faith, all of us moving on to perfection. When it became clear that my fellow parishioners and the church itself tended to be way more into dogma than applicable life theology, something like scales fell away from my eyes. I didn't feel like organized religion was speaking to me anymore, and I stepped away. I don't not believe. Honestly, my dilettante and imperfect grasp of quantum physics and string theory puts us in a much more complicated and fantastical reality than even the Book of Genesis can supply, and I find reality to be, in part, nebulously defined and elusively intractable, tantalizingly beyond our grasp or understanding. But if someone is hungry and I have a sandwich, I can give him half. If someone is homeless and I can vote for people with better policies, I can support them. Standing up for social justice seems to cost more than it should, and in times where division and greed seem ascendant, it's important to examine those messages and seek outreach and reconciliation. The best way to divide people is to weaponize differences. The best way to bring them together is to affirm similarities. So I'm absolutely going to encounter theology in this collection. Along with Houston Smith talking about the wisdom of faith, I've got History Channel pieces on the history of Christianity somewhere, as well as that National Geographic special I referenced in episode 6 on the Knights Templar, and those Christian Amanpour CNN God's Warriors discussions I referenced in episodes 2 and 3, and some of them are silly, like the Gospel of Judas, which is of interest as another window on the scriptural underpinnings of a major world faith, but little more than a curiosity for all practical purposes, and in terms of the intellectual contributions of this particular presentation, probably less even than that. Well, as with any sustained pursuit, some entries are stronger than others.
Diving into the classic collection.
In my classic collection, there were a couple of things that stood out to me as I was logging these episodes. I recorded several of these shows with commercials, and I marked where some of the more interesting commercials, interesting to me at least, were in these lineups. I marked commercials that I saw while cataloging these things, and the ones that stood out to me most were ones that featured bears. There was a tourism commercial for Big Sky, Montana that featured a grizzly bear enjoying the amenities of Big Sky Resort instead of hibernating. There was another for a service called Ask.com that showed visitors how to avoid a bear attack if they encounter a bear. The speaker had an outrageously European accent and pointed out that if a person encountered a bear, it would not be a good time to log into a website to find out what to do, but they could go to Ask.com and find out ahead of time. So I understand that Ask.com is a good place to seek solutions for problems people were not, at the moment, having. I'm beginning to see why they are no longer with us. And, oh wow, I found music videos. This is so... I know, but when I was growing up we had 4 channels with PBS, which became 5 channels in the mid-'80s with Fox. I never had cable. My very limited exposure to music videos came from NBC showing Friday night videos on, well, Friday nights, very late at night, so I kind of associated them with The Late Show with David Letterman. When it started, Wikipedia says in 1983, Friday night videos actually showed videos, so I'd see Michael Jackson's Beat It and Donna Summer singing She Works Hard for the Money, which I guess sometimes it takes a shift in perspective, but it did really make me appreciate how hard my mom worked, and I wanted to appreciate that. But it wasn't too long before the show wasn't actually showing any music videos anymore. I guess MTV was establishing itself as the exclusive home for these things, so this incredibly exciting new format for enjoying music was drying up for me. Then my family traveled to Yellowstone National Park when I was 15 or so. Our hotel got MTV, which was the first time I saw David Lee Roth's Yankee Rose and Madonna's Papa Don't Preach and GTR's When the Heart Rules the Mind. A whole new window had opened for me. Life had meaning and purpose. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to really connect with this brave new world that had such singers in it until I got to UND and had access to cable so I could thoroughly enjoy music videos. This coincided with Mike Judge's Beavis and Butthead music video commentary, which I thought was wonderfully subversive. There were plenty of videos by that time, and some were absolutely worth making fun of. Add in the independent animation sources behind Liquid Television, the Alternative Nation subreddit for sub-pop entries, and VH1's Behind the Music and pop-up videos, which celebrated trivia at a time when people were just loving the trivia, just prior to the internet being a thing where people could look stuff up for themselves, and I've got to say it, I was a huge fan. So I recorded music videos. There were several VHS tapes in my collection taken up entirely with music videos, a good chunk from a situation I think it must have been in the late 90s when MTV played every video they had from A-ha to ZZ Top, so I've absolutely got many more of these coming up. One I found in this most recent cataloging effort was a video that Madonna, seriously, she looks younger than she did in the 1980s, singing Sorry, Heard It All Before from her 2005 entry Confessions on a Dance Floor. It's got a strong disco vibe, seriously fun visuals, and she has a dance break in the video where she is limber as a gymnast, and in 2005, my god, the woman was about my age. I'm 48, and I promise you, on my very best day, I look nothing like that young, and oh hell, I am never moving like that. Awesome song, fantastic video, quite a lot of power and presence, and just loving the madge here. Well done. There were a couple shows I found this go-around that struck me as interesting. First, I remember recording the David E. Kelley's The Practice when it was airing on FX, I believe really early in the mornings. It was this crazy Boston-based lawyer show organized around Dylan McDermott and Kelly Williams and Lara Flynn Boyle being outrageously beautiful, supported by Steve Harris, Michael Badalucco, and Cameron Manheim. I wasn't really a fan of lawyers or procedurals or courtroom dramas, but this show wove in the right combination of soap opera and social comment to pull me in, and I know I have more episodes of this show coming. Other shows with more in the offing include the second season premiere of Dirt, starring Courtney Cox, I think probably British spy drama of MI5 from BBC America. I'm pretty sure just the pilot episode of New Amsterdam, where the guy from the Revolutionary Times was either blessed or cursed with eternal life until he finds his true love. Not a show I kept up with. And then I see where I'm starting to encounter a few dedicated tapes. A lot of my series recordings ended up jumbled together on whatever tape was in the VCR in any given evening. Then there were a smaller number of transfers I made from shows for which I held specific VHS tapes and switched in to record them more or less in order. For this installment, I ran into a run of dedicated tapes from the 5th season of 24 starring Kiefer Sutherland, the 9th season of South Park, and oh wow, the 2nd season of Numbers starring Rob Morrow, David Krumholtz, and Judd Hirsch. I say I gave the CBS FBI Meets the Wonderful World of Math way more of a chance than I should have because of Diane Farr from Rescue Me, but to be honest, I did enjoy more than they deserved the math references from Krumholtz as math prodigy Charlie Epps, who somehow had all the time and lack of focus necessary to constantly be pestering his FBI brother at FBI headquarters to suggest never off-the-mark approaches to rank-and-file criminal investigations, which were always so insightful that the crimes were then solved in 42 minutes. I really needed to be watching these ridiculous shows with a much more critical eye. So many things. Mario Cantone killed in a 2004 taping of his Broadway smash hit Laugh Whore. I saw where I kept a March interview by Jon Stewart of then-Senator Hillary Clinton in Austin as the primaries ground forward in 2008. I caught one of the last few episodes aired of Andy Richter in Andy Barker P.I., Jeff Goldblum in Reigns, and whoever in Killer Instinct. I know, I remember raving about it in episode 10, but by the episode I watched for this rundown, the formula was absolutely starting to fall apart. Then I encountered some difficulty in tracking down an episode of Medium. Start with the title. Standard words don't always want to track as television titles in Google searches. I had trouble with dialogue recognition, plot elements, nothing was coming up, but I recognized a guest star in the opening sequence, Adam Goldberg. But I didn't recognize him as Adam Goldberg. I punched him into the Googleator as Jim Gaffigan's best friend, since I remembered him from the Jim Gaffigan Show, and his face popped up as an image search from which I could track his name. I punched that back into IMDb and found the third season episode of Medium that he guest starred in, Joe Day Afternoon, where Joe Dubois and colleagues were held hostage in the workplace by, hey, Adam Goldberg, as disgruntled fired ex-employee Bruce Rossiter. I had similar difficulties tracking down the Season 4 Medium episode Aftertaste, guest starring Gregory Itzin from 24 as a sort of Hannibal Lecter character, but again, recognizing the guest star absolutely helped nail that one down too.
Taking care of some old business.
Shifting gears for a moment, I've got an update on the project I opened in episode 16, discussing how I discovered my archive of Sci-Fi's original 3-part miniseries, Tin Man, was scattered across 7 different DVDs, and I figured I should Frankendisc that thing just on principle. Well, last weekend I opened my second DVD binder where all of those discs had been nicely packed away, and pulled up discs 364, 365, 366, 370, 371, 372, and 373. In the process of tracking them in, I discovered one 30-second passage on disc 370 that was almost irreparably damaged. While recording the second episode of the miniseries, Search for the Emerald, I'd, for whatever reason, I can't tell you what I was thinking, opened the grid and clicked around among the show listings on my DVR while the episode continued playing in the upper right-hand corner. It's been ruined! Well, no, not ruined, or ruined, as people say, but it was hardly ideal, and provided any other option, in no way was it acceptable. So I decided to try fixing it. My first move was to open the disc in DVD shrink and save the damaged passage as a file I could then open with Nero and zoom in on the picture, which I then burned to a blank disc. Given the mediocre picture quality I was working with to begin with, blowing it up, imperfections and all, to 200% of its size in no way improved it, but it was certainly better than suddenly the picture is in the corner of the screen and some phantom weirdo is clicking around for another show to watch. Kills continuity a bit. Then I got Philip, my portable player, talking to Sonia, loaded in some blank media, and one by one, since they were hopelessly disordered, I dubbed the fractured series onto a new DVD. Episode 1, Into the Storm, was broken across 2 discs. Episode 2, Search for the Emerald, since I'd burned that recovered 30-second interval to a new disc, was now broken into 4 segments across 3 discs. When I reviewed the transition to the recovered material, it was obvious something had happened, but not exactly what. Also, if you just went by the audio, the transitions both in and out of the recovered segment were smooth as glass, so I was reasonably proud of that. Finally, I transferred episode 3, Tin Man, onto the new disc from where it had been broken across discs 372, 373, and 366. In the meantime, I cobbled together a cover from screen caps, and over the course of an afternoon, I transferred all 3 episodes of Tin Man to a homemade DVD, suitable for sitting on a shelf in my home until such time as anyone, may want to watch Zooey Deschanel run around in some dystopian weirdscape trying to be epic. Oh, I kid because I do. That said, it is kind of cool to know I'm able to recover material from damaged recordings should I ever need to.
Current collection.
Oh, I'm being so clever here. Anywho, recalling Gregory Itzin's Hannibal Lecter-esque performance from Medium, an 8th season Bob's Burgers I caught most of featured Molly Shannon as a crazy shut-in obsessed with Louise, whose manipulative insights break a crime of vandalism at Wagstaff School wide open. Or does it? Who can tell? My recording of that episode cut out halfway through. No matter, I'll just enjoy my first season episode of Bad Tina on disc X098, where, oh crap, that one cuts out too. There's a really bad screw-up that happened to the Drink the Kool-Aid episode of American Horror Story Cult, where, and I'm not sure how I missed this, but for the second half of the episode, I actually paused the recording while the episode played and recorded the commercials I was fast-forwarding. The show is no longer available for free on demand, so I may have to stream the thing if I want to preserve it. Meh. This is ultimately a human enterprise, definitely prone to the occasional mistake. Speaking of on demand, Ralph and I discovered just a slug of We Bare Bears episodes on demand that we hadn't seen before, and I happily recorded. There was an outrageous period drama by Lifetime set in the 1970s called Girl in the Box, focused on a scary couple who kept a hitchhiker captive as a sex slave in their home for years. Yeesh. Then I kept a few book reports I saw on C-SPAN too, one by Hillary Clinton and two about her, which provided some good insights, I thought. I also archived a copy of Twin Cities public television documentary Out North, an MN LGBTQ history, put together last fall, which seemed like a thought-provoking discussion. The documentary discussed repression and small-town life and the relative acceptance and freedom of expression in the Twin Cities. It talked about civil rights, tolerance, and acceptance, as well as what is believed to be the first official same-sex marriage in the U.S., or anywhere, conducted in the 1970s between a couple of Minnesotan men and otherwise made legally binding through lawyers and documents. Otherwise, gays in Minnesota have been able to marry under state law since 2013, and if the Supreme Court hadn't affirmed expanding the constitutional definition of full faith and credit in 2015, Ralph and I actually had been considering hopping the river to make honest men of each other for a couple of years by then. I've been very occasionally archiving Prairie Public original programming, and one interesting segment showed up a couple weeks ago on the arts and cultural discussion format Prairie Mosaic. Violet Deagle, a Wishick, North Dakota woman who traces her roots, as my dad's parents did, to Germans from Russia extraction, prepared a batch of styrum, assisted by her godchild Carmen Rothweide. She gave the recipe as 1.5 cups of flour, 3 eggs, a teaspoon of baking powder, a cup of milk, and a teaspoon of salt. Carmen commented that it looked like pancake batter, and looking at the recipe I agreed, though at those ratios it was more like a flour omelet, this thick, eggy mass that you cook up over medium heat in... Well, she used a cast iron pan, and when I made it I used a non-stick pan that was okay, but did not give me the space hers had to cook the dish properly, I don't think. She worked hers furiously, she and Carmen cutting away at it as it cooked until it was a nice, evenly browned fuff of crumbs, which is what her family called it. When I considered the recipe, it reminded me of a dish I'd had at, well, I recently became a fan of savory crepes, of at all places IHOP, which is more known for dessert for breakfast. I had what amounted to a ham and cheese omelet wrapped in an unsweetened crepe there, and it was amazing. So when she recommended serving styrum over sliced cucumbers or a spring salad, the only thing I could think of was, no, what a texture disconnect. Why would you introduce rich and toothsome and breakfasty to wet and wilt and déjeuner? Rather, I saw styrum as the perfect accompaniment to sausage and bacon, and I didn't try topping it with cheese, but I think shred cheese would have gotten along with this dish perfectly. The proof of the styrum is in the eating, of course, and despite its not breaking up as nicely and looking a bit underdone compared to Violet's results, I was charmed utterly. If a pancake could be a cheese curd, that was the expression I had achieved here. I'd mixed in some sausage and bacon crumble to enjoy with my hash browns for my breakfast, and then enjoyed the rest later as one would a bowl of popcorn. I'd never encountered the dish before now, and Ralph was not a fan, so I don't think it'll become a new favorite go-to for weekends, but it was fun to try something new, and I posted a photo of my efforts to Video Fuzzy's Facebook page. Also, I got to see the finale of Waco, and it did not disappoint. The heavy-handed government thugs broke faith with the compound, and the endlessly gentle and patient cult leader, facility coordinator David Koresh, busting down walls and trapping the screaming, crying, endlessly sympathetic victims of government violence, cornering them in inescapable vaults and spraying gunfire and flammable tear gas at good and decent citizens who wanted nothing more than just to distribute guns totally legally at regional gun shows to support their sweet, innocent, not remotely sexual or theologically weird plural marriage cult. It was a cult. It was a damn cult. This could have ended on day one if they'd negotiated in good faith and not been following a psycho loon. Even this show that made it clear from the opening scene it had no faith in government forces, did not deny that Koresh forced one of his followers to type her fingers bloody raw to complete his manifesto, which was nothing more than an endless mishmash of biblical-sounding bosh that in any event was not worth the life of a single person, not one single child in that compound. Yes, we're a nation of laws. Yes, we have freedom and security and all that good stuff. But if people are reporting child abuse and you refuse to let investigators investigate, you sure make it look like you've got lots to hide. And in the wake of Ruby Ridge, referenced in this show, you see who you're dealing with. Certainly, as portrayed in the show, trigger-happy thugs uninterested in negotiation. So, it's really not wise to behave like children. Well, now that you've finished with this 6-part Waco expose, what's next, Paramount? That sweet little target range Gordon Call was operating in Medina, North Dakota? Or how about that little nature conservancy, that nice group of freemen? Oh, they sound like fun. The Freemen of Justice Township we're launching in Montana. Or a celebration of frontiersman spirit with the Bundys in Nevada. Or that hippie protest sit-in at Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in Oregon. How about a nice exploration of real estate opportunities with Craig Cobb and friends in Leith, North Dakota? I'm sure there's all sorts of sweet, innocent, misunderstood anarchists we can celebrate next. It hasn't all been bad, of course. The last 2 episodes of The Magicians on Sci-Fi have been outstanding. The search for the keys to unlock and restore magic continued with the 5th key, a musical key that led the questers into a pocket reality in which music and positive vibes held sway, and once the key was discovered, it allowed them to communicate with each other telepathically. So, no more e-bunnies! They send messages to each other from one dimension to the other through bunnies. It's a thing. And the truth of the fairies being enslaved in this world and ground into magical powder came to a head when the fairy queen broke a centuries-old deal that allowed humans to enslave them and turned the tables on their human captors. The price for that betrayal was death, and her sacrifice freed her people. This is a story that is comfortable exploring unintended consequences, so it'll be fun to see where they go from there. We got a bit of insight on serial killer Andrew Cunanan in FX's American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, when he returned home to visit his mother. His mother was crazy as a bedbug, hungry to believe every easily seen-through lie that Andrew told her while, oh, wow, and washing her grown-ass son in the tub. Life in a boundary-free existence absolutely throws a little window open on this guy, but I have a feeling we'll be learning even more about him, about his psychopathy and his pathological lying in subsequent episodes. There's been a few other things. Having loved all over the 2013 B-movie production of Machete Kills, I had so much fun watching Danny Trejo rock the 2010 original Machete, especially in light of our current immigration discussion. I'm not up to date on The Alienist on TNT, but I look forward to seeing where they're taking it. And on Superstore, Jonah and Amy hide out in an abandoned storeroom, and they basically enjoy Puck's potion-induced carefree third act of Midsummer Night's Dream together until they're free, and Jonah goes back to Kelly, leaving Amy with some seriously conflicted feelings about Jonah. Then Garrett cuts together some security footage of Amy and Jonah kissing during the tornado, and the whole store weighs in on whether they're on Team Kelly or Team Amy. Jonah and Amy try to laugh it off as a joke, but in one of those insanely common all-employee break room staff meetings this show has so many of, one wonders who's ever manning the registers, Amy reveals that she had a crush on Jonah, and Jonah didn't know, so now Kelly doesn't know what to think. In and among all of this, Mateo has finally revealed to the regional supervisor, Jeff, that he's in the country illegally, though from his story about it, he'd be eligible for DACA, since I think that's still technically a thing. But it was why he broke up with Jeff in the first place, because he needed to update his paperwork to change stores, which he had to do because he couldn't date a direct supervisor. Jeff's response at the end of the episode is to tell Mateo that he quit his job. Mateo is safe, he can stay at Cloud9, and since Jeff is no longer his supervisor, they can be together now. This represents a huge shift for Jeff, whose ambition just a few episodes ago was such that he was gunning for a top-rated Cloud9, but in that same episode he was mourning his breakup with Mateo even though he was rekindling his relationship with an ex named Chad. He stood there, a man in love, offering his heart to Mateo, who, it seemed in that moment, was speechless, but a man in love with Jeff. After a whole episode of Will They or Won't They with Amy and Jonah and Kelly, this exchange came completely out of nowhere, and I've got to say, I really love when shows are written this well. Finally, closing out a discussion on sitcoms and theology, this seemed like a good place to highlight a CBS production that they're airing instead of more 9JKL. A couple of weeks ago now, I pulled up the premiere of Living Biblically. I can sum up my reaction to this in one word. No. For anyone who'd like me to unpack that a little bit, we meet Jay Ferguson as film reviewer Chip Curry at the crossroads of his best friend's untimely death, and he discovers the soon-to-be birth of he hopes it'll be a boy. He's a lapsed Catholic, so by the pronouncement of his late best friend's mother, Chip will be going to hell, just like her son. Chip lets these conflicting thoughts play around in his brain. Also the concept that he's not a good person because he sometimes takes the last donut at work and doesn't confront his philandering coworker Frank about the adultery, and determines, having accidentally selected a Bible at a bookstore, which I suppose could be easy to do. I mean, who hasn't found themselves at a bookstore checkout with the occasional Bible, that instead of putting it back, he is going to live his life as directed by the Bible. Not discouraging this behavior very hard is Ian Gomez as Father Gene, a priest he encounters in confessional. Adding to the conversation is David Krumholtz as Rabbi Gil Abelman. By the end of the first episode, based on Father Gene's citation of God's law that adulterers are to be stoned to death, that is, Leviticus chapter 10, verse 20, Chip throws a rock at the head of Frank, his philandering coworker, who thanks him for making him see the error of his ways. The error of his ways where Frank's occasionally having sex with people not his wife on the hoods of other people's cars in the parking garage, and Frank's grateful for his colleague's assault with a stone in a restaurant, and Frank is now working things out with his wife. Wow, what fantasy is this? Well, apparently this show is based on a book someone wrote, so that makes this right, I guess, and suggests that some of this actually happened, which... wow. Longtime Big Banger Johnny Galecki executive produces the thing, which doesn't make me feel any so much better about it. The rocks are just going to keep flying, I suppose, because Chip's boss, played by Cameron Manheim of The Practice, is a lesbian. Leviticus chapter 18 verse 22 expanded in Leviticus chapter 20 verse 13. She's just approved him writing a column about his experiences, though, because the whole building is talking about this idea of his to live his life according to the Bible, which seems unlikely. So, yeah, when you're going to throw that rock at your boss, Chip? I don't imagine I'll see it, though, since I'm not going to be encouraging this nonsense by viewing it. I also finally watched an episode of Judd Hirsch and Jermaine Fowler in Superior Donuts on CBS, which seems like a live-action Bob's Burgers but donuts, and an indifferent approach to functional business models, and three regulars who, far as I can tell from this one episode, are Maz Jobrani, Katie Segal, and David Koechner, basically three teddies from Bob's Burgers. Beyond Numbers alumni Judd Hirsch and David Krumholtz shows being so close together, oh hey, Leviticus and Numbers. Not much to comment beyond, once again, a no. And that will just about do it for, oh hey, I think this is the longest one yet. Thank you for checking into my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at videofuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes of this podcast at Apple Podcasts and iTunes and videofuzzy.libsyn.com. Feedback is always appreciated, and you can contact me through my blog or podcast sites. I'll be looking now, I promise, or through my Video Fuzzy page on Facebook. For Video Fuzzy, I'm Terry J. Ahman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on Video Fuzzy.